Upward mobility in America is not common. It's possible, but not common.
Accordingly, upper middle class blacks tend to be first generation upper middle class. And when being upwardly mobile, we find ourselves assimilating out of necessity. And believe it or not, assimilation doesn't take much time at all. My wife and I have been living in New Hampshire for just 2 years, and in those 2 short years, we've already become whiter. Being born and raised in Detroit, it was easy to pop into a corner store and pick up an Essence magazine or an Ebony magazine. Now we're relegated to looking at those magazines online or ordering them online. At one time, I could listen to a gospel music station or tune into the Steve Harvey morning show while driving to work. Now we're relegated to waiting until we get into our offices and listening via the internet. Accessing black culture just becomes much more difficult living in a place like New Hampshire. And oftentimes it takes that additional work that just becomes inconvenient and we don't do it. Well, imagine our upper middle class black children growing up in an environment where black culture is not readily accessible. They grow up without a desire to even tap into that culture. They grow up in a white world where they have zero desire to connect with who they are. Today's talk, unfortunately for some, but fortunately for me, is self-interested. So I don't really care what the rest of you think. But no, in all sincerity, it is self-interested. In speaking to you all, I'm trying to strategize a way to raise a child that's perfect. A child that is black, that is proud of being black, and that won't be ashamed to say that he's black and advocate for others of his race. I'm also trying to reach out to other upper middle class black parents who are raising little upper middle class black children to institute strong black identity in their children. So today's talk is going to walk you all down a little bit of my memory lane, I guess. I'm going to talk to you about growing up in this lower middle class black background, and now my experience living in an upper middle class black background. And in looking at the things that distinguish the two subclasses, income and education are the biggest ones. Now, income and education generally transfer or translate into lifestyle type things. But for a bit, I want to talk to you all about education and income. In terms of blacks' educational levels, you can see a very small percentage of us have professional and doctoral degree levels, less than 2%. I know, I'm a unicorn. When you add in those with master's degrees, we make up slightly less than 8%. But the biggest thing I want to show in this slide is the great proportion of blacks that have a high school diploma or less, almost 78%. When looking at the upper middle class and sort of the proportion of American society, the upper middle class, all races, right, make up almost 20% of the population. And my definition for upper middle class here is $100,000, but I want to tell you all that that definition is a little too simple. As students who are in my social class course, Class Status and Power, you know that class is much more difficult, much more complex than this one variable. But for now, I'm going to give you all the $100,000 amount. Among blacks, upper middle class blacks tend to make up about 18%. So while 18% sounds large, that's really just a fifth of the population. So it's still a pretty rare group. And when we look later on at residential patterns, you'll see that these blacks that are making up this 18% typically don't live around this other 80%. We know that blacks in America make up approximately 13% of the population. But while we make up 13% of the population, you can see that we make up just shy of 2% of the American population. I'm sorry, upper middle class blacks make up just 2% of the American population. So upper middle class folks in general, right, this is all races, make up approximately 25%. This is the small slice of upper middle class blacks. I want to take you all to lifestyle. You all might remember that I said education and income are pretty important in predicting people's lifestyles. The reason why I say education and income is that oftentimes to live a certain kind of lifestyle, you have to have a certain level of income. But to do certain things with your children or to take interest in doing certain things with your children, oftentimes it's your education that says, I should probably be taking my child to do this, or this is likely to benefit my child in terms of going to college or becoming an astronaut. So I want to introduce you all to my parents in the 90s. Y'all don't talk about my mom's shades, my father's socks. But you can see right here, we were in Atlanta. We were visiting, I think it's called the Coke World Museum or something like that, but whatever the Coke Museum is in Atlanta, we were on vacation there. But largely our vacations, our summers were spent having a lot of fun, doing lots of travel that a lot of my friends didn't do. So I chose this very big picture so you all can see how much of a stud I was back in the 80s. That stomach, yeah, but my shoes were crisp. Y'all have to. I can't remember where we were right here. I can't remember. We were either in Atlanta or Disney World because I remember that we did those trips together. But nonetheless, our vacations were spent traveling. And when I was preparing for this talk initially, I was planning to tell you all how certainly I knew that I grew up with a good amount of advantage. But I was coming in to tell you all, how disadvantaged I was in comparison to my 4-year-old son who has a frequent flyer account with airlines, right? And he's racking up these miles and pretty soon will have a free flight himself, right? And it took me until I was 16 to even fly for the first time. So I came to tell you about all this disadvantage, but then I was thinking no, my parents did cultural activities with me. Cultural activities that some people might say of low culture, but nonetheless, still culture. So right here you can see I'm fishing. I'm still focused on my shoes. You all can see that I wear Chuck Taylors today. I'm still a germaphobe because I'm wearing gloves right here. Right here we were at a theme park, right, Kings Island in Ohio. We went to lots of theme parks. This is me driving for my first time, right, before my driver's license. And this is me when I was at the Coke Museum again. This one was significant to me because, as I told you all, I was thinking about how disadvantaged I was in the lower culture that I experienced as opposed to the quote-unquote higher culture. But going to a museum like this is of a higher culture. It's something that with a PhD, I'd take my son to do and feel like that was like a valuable experience. So I guess in a sense, I want to say that my parents were decently cutting edge, right? They were exposing me to culture. Right here, you all see pictures of my wife's education and my education, right? I love fancy academic regalia. It is my most favorite outfit. It's probably my most expensive outfit, right? Let me guess, how much you all think this costs? 600. 1,000. The person that said the 1,000 is right, $990. Yeah, my wife told me to rent it, but I didn't, right? So I have it, it is mine. These 3 velvet bars feel so great to me. They represent a lot of education that a small group of people have. So I am proud of it. I'm not haughty about it, but I am proud of it. It's my wife's education, along with my education, that gives us the money that we make, the lifestyle that we lead, to introduce my son to things. So you can see, he does much more than I did. My parents did a lot with me, but my son, he experiences a lot. You might not be able to see this one, it's a little bit dark, but actually this is his stroller. In his infancy, right, we took him to Washington, D.C. to see the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. monument, right? Right here, he's at the St. Louis Arch, Niagara Falls, at a live show, I think it was Disney on Ice or something like that in Manchester, New Hampshire. He's at a Lego exhibit right here and right here. This is the Pacific Ocean behind us when we were taking a trip from Los Angeles to San Diego. He's gone to the Great Wax Museum in Baltimore, the Ben & Jerry's factory here in Vermont. And this right here is one of a more recent trip when we went to the Boston Aquarium. And our most recent event, which was just a week or 2 ago when we took him to see another live show, Marvel. And some people are thinking, well, okay, it was a superhero show. But what you do is, in these cultural activities, children learn how to have expectation. They learn to aspire certain things. They learn that if I went to a Marvel show, I have to take my child to the moon, right? Because that's what upward mobility is in America, that we all want to do a step more than what our parents did. So to give you all kind of a bit of a global yet local understanding of where black people live, there are 4 major cities. Detroit, Michigan, which happens to be the only northern city that has a high population of blacks. 84% of the population is black. As I tell you all, I was born and raised in Detroit. So growing up, I didn't have much experience at all with white people. It's funny, in doing research for this talk, I was looking up the elementary and middle school that I attended, and it was 98.8% black. 98.8% black, 0 whites, and like a 0.5% Asian, a 0.5%, half percent white, 0.5% Hispanic, but no Asians, right? So Detroit is a black city. Next, it's Jackson, Mississippi, which has 80% blacks in the city. Then we move to Miami Gardens, Florida, which has 78% blacks. And last, Birmingham, Alabama, which has 74% blacks. So the greatest proportion of blacks are living in these 4 major cities. Just one is in the north, as the majority of black people in America live in the south. I can tell you where black people don't live. Black people do not live in New Hampshire. Right? Let me reiterate, black people do not live in New Hampshire. 1% of the population, of the state's population, lives in New Hampshire, right? Right here where we're located in New London, 0.2% black. But there's great news coming up in my next bullet point, great news. At my son's school, there's 3% black. So that's pretty progressive, isn't it? No, it's not really that progressive. He's the only black child in his school. But we are still thankful for that progression that we have, gotten him in this school, and he, along with 2 or 3 of his other friends, are bringing the diversity back, people. Pretty soon, New London will be the hood. So in talking to you all today, I said before that I am so very proud of the degree that I've earned, the PhD that I have, the master's degree that my wife has. But this talk is not largely about my high level of education. It's actually about the lower middle class that I grew up in, the work that my parents invested in me, the things that they gave me that live on, that are not material possessions, but ways to love and care about my community, ways to remember who I am as a person, ways to give back to my community and the people that I call my people. So this first point I know seems kind of trite. It seems kind of given. People say, well, duh, you're black. Of course you have an appreciation for black people. Let me tell you all, not so much. I think that black people are interesting people. I think that we are fun people. I think that we are funny people, right? I think that we are multifaceted people. I think that we are resilient people. I really appreciate black people. Some people don't. If I could draw you all into, my world and forget about any judgment that might come after this talk. But it does frustrate me a little bit when I see black people that don't have any black friends. Even if that's not the community that you grew up in, to me it just seems like something in you would say, that's something I want to explore now that I'm an adult. Now that I'm away at college or at work or, a new neighborhood or something like that, and black culture is accessible to me. So it does bug me. One of my colleagues just did a talk about protesting. It bothered me when my black students, and when I say black, I'm speaking of African American, I'm speaking of my African students, my Afro-Caribbean students here at the college. It bothered me when I saw a group of black students, and some students that were not black, right? White, Hispanic, Asian, that were protesting for the Black Lives Matter movement. And I saw other black students just walking past. Quite honestly, I wanted to take this PhD off. Right? I wanted to take off whatever blazer I may have been wearing that day. And I really wanted to just walk up to them and be like, what are you doing? These people are fighting for you. Because regardless of this degree that I have, when I'm driving in my car, no one knows that I'm a doctor. They see that I'm black. So then when someone is fighting for black rights, they are fighting for me. They are fighting for you. So I have an appreciation for blacks. I also have a commitment to blacks. When people ask me what commitment looks like, they say, Omari, what does commitment look like to you? I am committed to my wife. We hang out. Tonight we'll watch The Real Housewives of Atlanta. Right? I am committed. My money goes to her. No, I'm trying to get more of that money. But nonetheless, we see what commitment means. What do you spend your money on? What do you spend your time on? When I hear people say, I'm committed to the black community, where do you spend your time? Where do you spend your money? Does it look like you are committed to blacks? If I just let it happen, and I don't know what that it is right now, we'll figure it out throughout the talk, but if I just let it happen with my son, he won't have this connection to blacks, right? Because right now he's not around a lot of blacks. To tell you all about our commitment to blacks, my wife and I feel so fortunate and blessed to have found a community of black people, right? So, once or twice a month, we drive 40 minutes north. People are thinking like, it never gets blacker as you go north. I know, it usually doesn't, right? But we're really fortunate to have a good group of black friends that live in Hanover, that work at Dartmouth. And we've engrossed our son in that black experience with those children, those other upper middle class black children. Let me go out and say that those are probably people that are on the cusp of actually being upper class in terms of money, because as I said before, they work at Dartmouth. But nonetheless, that's important to us that he have black friends. We don't knock the fact that he has white friends, Hispanic friends, Asian friends, but our son is black, and we want him to know that he is black. So that we have to strategically take him out of what naturally exists, what easily exists, and put him in situations where he is around people that look like him. Urban education. I'm a proponent of urban education. At least my urban education, I should say. But that's what made me a strong person. It was through my urban education at my elementary and middle school, which this is a bit of a blurry picture, but the only one I could find. This was years ago that I went here. But this is Ralph Waldo Emerson on the west side of Detroit. I went there for 8 years. My parents were smart enough. I'm not going to say that it doesn't, that you're not a smart parent if you move your child around out of necessity, but my parents understood the importance of keeping me in a school for 8 years of my life, right? They understood the importance of stability and things like that. That when I look back on those things as a professional sociologist, I say to myself, that's a huge variable, right? That's a huge variable that makes a child, competent, makes a child intelligent, makes a child, self-confident, all those different things. So I went to just 2 schools from K to 12. The stuff that I learned at Ralph Waldo Emerson Elementary and Middle School was the stuff that prepared me for a magnet school that some people might say, oh, this doesn't look that great, but I purposely showed you all the school that I attended because we didn't always have books. We didn't even always have enough chairs for students to sit in. And people are thinking, well, that's a magnet school? I know. But that magnet school placed me in one of the premier institutions in the country, the University of Michigan. For those of you that know, I'm very prideful about my experience at the University of Michigan. It is a world-class institution. And it's this that rooted me to do so well at the University of Michigan, and then to go on to get a doctorate, to be the professor that you all see before you at Colby-Sawyer. And some people are probably thinking, oh, well, that school failed him. I know. We can fight after class, and I'll fail you. Just kidding. But it truly is. I think back to things that I learned when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. That is what makes me strong when I get knocked down at times. It was these teachers that instilled self-confidence and self-worth. These teachers, when we were acting out of line, they would let us know, right? Maybe every now and again they use a curse word. Maybe every now and again they threw something at us. And I know people were like, but that's so abusive, but it kept us in line. They were never there to hurt us. They were like second, third, fourth, fifth, whatever number you want to count. They were like parents to us. They taught us to love who we are. I sometimes see black people that are, ashamed of being very fair-skinned or ashamed of being very dark-skinned. That wasn't something that our teachers told us was okay, right? Whatever you are, you should be happy with it. If it is short hair, long hair, dark skin, light skin, if it is short, tall, if you're pudgy, if you're skinny, whatever it is, to be confident in who you are. To feel like you matter, that's a self-worth, right? That's a pretty big thing because lots of us struggle with feeling worthy. But our teachers taught us to believe that we were important and that we could achieve anything. They taught us to define our blackness because, as you all know, the media and the government will certainly define your blackness if you allow them to. So when I was in school, we didn't talk about all this stuff that plagues the black community, if it is murder, if it's drugs, if it is single-parent households, any of the things that you can talk about that plague the black community, we didn't focus on those things. We focused on the entrepreneurs that existed in our community. We focused on the inventors that built this country. Some people are like, what, built this country? Yeah, built this country. Created some of the stuff that we use now, like cars, lights, stoplights, right? We talked about artists, right? We talked about different poets. I can't remember who the poet is, but I just remember the few lines that said, my black is beautiful, can't you see all the different hues, right? We read books by Maya Angelou. I'm not going to mention any more, because I can't remember all of them. But nonetheless, we read all these books by these African-American artists that I'm not so confident my son would read growing up in a suburban or rural area. In case I didn't tell you all or you couldn't see it, I have a strong black identity. I am not shy about being black. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I encourage you to find whatever it is that you are and be strong about it. My strong black identity came from my urban education because I was surrounded by so many black kids. I was surrounded by black teachers. And if those teachers weren't black, they nonetheless had a desire to uplift our neighborhoods. So as I tell you all, I am unapologetically black. As a black professor, I unapologetically teach about black issues, despite complaints that I speak about blacks too much in class. I advocate and support minority students. I want my minority students to know that there's nothing that I won't do, right? There's nothing I wouldn't do to help you as much as possible. So despite the little reputation, or I should say, despite the little regard that we get as professors for supporting minority students, because our major two components that we're graded on would be research and teaching, and sometimes people say service, right? But there's no doubt in my mind when I think they say, oh, you're just helping some little black students, or you're just helping, right? I don't know. But despite the little professional regard we get, I will always make a strong effort to advocate, to serve, to lead anything that I can do within the black community. So I want to leave my son, who's sitting right there watching me, and I'll journal about this later on tonight, this whole process. I want to leave him with a few things. In addition to knowing things like the Black National Anthem, the Electric Slide, Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday, I want him to know that he should be defining his excellence. Don't let other people do it. In life, there are going to be people who will say that he's not good enough or he's less than they are. He has to set his standards and define his excellence. I want him to know that while others walk, he must run. This means that when he is due at a meeting, he must get there earlier. Now, I'm going to say that with a little bit of laugh because some of my colleagues in the room know that I am not the most timely person. But again, I want my son to be better than I am. This is all about upward mobility, you all. But he needs to get to that meeting on time. He needs to over-prepare for a presentation. He must run while others must walk. Society is not fair. So while he has a ton of privilege as an upper middle class black parent, and he can be, as an upper middle class black child, and he can be one of the children that says, my parent is, statistically speaking, a very rare person, right? Period. But then when you make him a black person, he's even more statistically rare. But none of that means anything, right? When he's driving in his car, or when he's the only black child sitting among his friends. I don't want him to get caught up in the hype of thinking because he goes to school with other children of children of other races, that because he's hanging out with them, that they oftentimes perceive him as the same. Because let me tell you all, if you hang around people of another race, and I'll go ahead and give the example of whites, tell me they've never made an offensive joke and it kind of stung you like, oh, I didn't know my friend felt that way about black people. And you kind of sat there and cried inside, and when you left the table, you contacted your parent. You thought you were equal when you were sitting at the lunch table with them, but when you went home with your friend who may not be racist, you found out that the mother or the father would say, you all can be friends, but you can't marry that person. So in his walk of life, I don't want him to ever not hang around people because of their race, but I also don't want him to be surprised when people make racist remarks. I want him to embrace the black community. I want him to feel a strong commitment to blacks that are less well off, because statistically speaking, the majority of blacks are less well off than him. But I don't want him to get caught up in the money, the reputation, or things like that. I want him to be down in the trenches, because my son ain't growing up the way I did. Thank you all.